Hello everyone and welcome to a slightly different real-time storytelling this time. So anyone that saw our Thursday stream will have seen me using something called Patchwork, which is a new tool from Midjourney, and working with chat to create the story for today within Patchwork, which means we've got a couple of pictures and some idea of a very light framework. I haven't done anything with it in the meantime besides tidy it up a little so that I've got a rough scene by scene. There are 6 scenes that have got pictures ready to go. So everything within that is still flexible, so chat can still provide guidance if I get anyone. It's looking awfully quiet out there. As usual, this is reliant on chat. If no one appears in chat, then we pause and come back to it on another day. So anyone in chat, please wave, say hello. Well, anyone watching, please wave and say hello. Everything otherwise is set and ready to go. So now it's just a case of giving it a bit of time to see if anyone comes along. Other information outside of that, most of this will disappear probably 12 to 18 hours after this video completes, because that's how long it takes YouTube to process it, and then we will just concentrate on the story itself. On Monday, so tomorrow, we have the last of the Colour Outer Space. Then we have Edgar Allan Poe, The Masque of the Red Death. And then John Pilladori's The Vampire. Sorry, that's the week after. We have Lord Byron's The Burial, a Fragment, which is the first ever real vampire story in literature. Hey Tootie! And that's on Friday, which then leads up to, because it was the inspiration for the Pilladori, the vampire, which was then the inspiration for Dracula. So there's a long chain of it all. So that's the next couple of weeks. There is a slight change to both the format, hey Legion, and the thumbnails from Christmas Day. So have a look, tell me what you think. The blue swirly has basically disappeared from Christmas Day and will be replaced with the picture lasting for longer. So you get the same amount of time with the picture full screen, and then you get me again in front of the picture until the next picture cuts in. So let me know what you think. I'm getting a bit of a sore throat, so I'm hoping my voice is gonna hold out for this. We shall see. So the 2 people I have in chat, Tutti Frutti and Legion of the Damned, were both very heavily involved in the creation of the framework for this. In fact, Tutti's creations kept showing up every time I tried to get it to create more text after the fact. So if you watch the video, the beginning of it started quite humorously, just putting silly things together, but then we just left them tucked to one side, and every time I clicked generate more text, hey Fred, it came up with something crazy, usually involving jelly. Try and keep my throat hydrated. If it gets too bad, I'm afraid I'll have to drop out. Tutti infected the AI, that much is true. Very, very much true. It was quite humorous. it was all the, that crazy silly stuff we put with jelly and everything was going to be candy, and then suddenly I'd go, right, tell me a bit more about one of these characters in the story, and suddenly there would be portals to other multiverses made of jelly showing up, and it was kind of, oh yeah, Tootie. So yes, you've been there for me for days, Tootie. So guys, feel free to still post other ideas as we go. The other thing, as it's the three of you who are on there, I don't know if you saw, I posted a comment saying it might be a nice idea if we do that again to create a Discord chat, so actually we're all talking in real time, because that way you haven't got the 6-second lag before anything happens and it's not quite so stilted. What do you think of that? So we have at least one taker, so that's positive. The other thing it'll do is make it better for viewers, because me talking there, doing a bad impression of William Shatner, where I have long pauses, probably isn't that engaging, whereas I think we could have some real fun interactions between us. Let's talk about it on Discord during the weekend, possibly do a test and get things set up for Thursday. Possibly Thursday I have to drop my wife off at the airport to fly to the States Thursday morning. So depending just how exhausted I am when I get back, we shall see. That's perfectly understandable, Fred. And that's equally understandable, Tootie. The only thing there is the Discord. I thought you were in the Discord, which is very small and will always be very, very heavily contained. It needs to be a safe space, but it's perfectly up to you. That said, if we have nothing else going on, as Pink said, let's get this party started. Oh, that was a bit harsh. There was silence in the arena as they waited for the opponents to move into place and start. This was a long-awaited match. There were a horde of bots controlled by one cyborg, and then there were Frank and Debbie. Frank and Debbie were the unknowns. But the arena was large. What they didn't know was that the cyborg was known for cheating. The sense of atmosphere and excitement in the crowd grew, preparing as they watched. The two just sat there looking at a couple of airborne drones, some ground drones, in armour, with weapons on them. Debbie more delicate. She'd been a ballerina and she liked to flit and move around, whereas Frank was big, solid. He had a heavy hammer on his back, armour, and several ranged weapons, eyeing at the airborne drones. There was various material scattered round the arena for cover, and the bigger robots started to lumber up, ready to go. In the background, a loud klaxon went off, signalling the start of the fight, and everybody moved. Frank and Debbie dove for cover as the two drones instantly opened fire. Looking and noticing the way that the fire came across the ground, though this was supposed to be a tame fight, not one to the death, it was obvious they were using live ammo, and things had suddenly got a lot more serious. Looking up, they split in different directions, causing the various drones out in the open to move. Frank eyed up the ones on the ground, and Debbie saw the ones in the air. Thinking there were bits, there were cables, they could possibly find places they couldn't be reached within the debris. The drones were large and not that clever. They could hear the subtle, dark laugh from the cyborg, who thought he had this laced up. Looking up, Debbie noticed something pop out of an airborne drone and dove as suddenly a rocket streamed straight across. Seeing a larger robot, she dived and hid herself in amongst the legs of the larger creature, pulling herself in to see what circuitry was in there. Meanwhile, Frank had his big hammer as one of the other drones had run towards him. Thinking it had the advantage, Frank had twisted the handle, and as he hit the large robot that should have been able to outmatch him, a spark covered and electricity flowed through the robot, frying its systems. Sadly, he only had one shot with that. But an idea occurred to him. As he saw Debbie fiddling with one robot, he nodded, pointed to another, and she smiled. Working inside, typing, putting cables together, she'd found there was still some power in this bot's core. Pumping it out, she put a signal connecting to each of the other pieces of debris, and realizing the one that Frank had signaled to had power as well. Frank lumbered in front of it, hammer ready to go, and the other robot charged him. Frank ducked and they started parrying and fighting, but when he looked towards Debbie, he could see she had her own problems. The airborne drones were now scattering fire on her as they went. She nipped out, darted, ducked back in, and a drone swung in low to get her. She smashed a button on the side, and suddenly a flash came out from the large robot she was on, and the drone fell lifelessly out of the air. Turning, she nodded to Frank. Frank started making moves, seeming to slow down. The robot prepared and pounced at him. Frank dropped, rolled as the robot hit the other remaining piece of debris. Sparks flew as electricity seared through it, and the robot dropped. Debbie screamed as rounds seemed to hit her leg. She rolled out of the way and Frank moved the last airborne drone heading round towards her, but that wasn't where the round had come from. The cyborg was there with his own gun shooting at her. Frank was livid, but at the moment he had to deal with the overhead robot. Dropping, he pulled one of his own toys, turned it, and the live frisbee started blinking. The robot was distracted as the other two were trying to pin Debbie, and he threw. It soared in a clear, clean arc, and as it hit the top over the other drone, he hit a button, and magnetically it clamped straight down on top of it, exploding in a scatter of sparks, sending parts of the robot in various directions. Suddenly, the cyborg looked up nervously. Frank smiled and started charging towards him, Debbie turning out and pulling what seemed like a weapon. The cyborg's hands immediately went up. "Yield! I yield!" They'd won. The crowd went mad. No one had beaten him before. He always had tricks or cheats up his sleeves. But of course, no one had thought to use the arena itself against him. Moving on, they came together, and the master of the arena raised their hands over their heads as winners and gave them their payout, most of which was based on the amount of money they had both put in to the battle. And the cyborg looked very angry as he lost his. Battle over, they realized that it was not a good place to be. Suddenly, they had this feeling that perhaps the cyborg may have friends. So, they headed off to their ship, getting ready to leave the space station the arena was on and head out and put as much distance from them as was possible. Getting in, strapping into space, suddenly they heard noises as they started the pre-flight checks, and the cyborg was there with more robots and what looked like others. Without pausing, without completing the checks, they launched. The ship headed up straight into the sky, moving off, leaving them wondering. Suddenly, just as they cleared, sparks started coming from the computer, and as they went to try and go into hyperspace, there was a judder as they jumped only a very short distance, crashing back into normal space, still in the same system. They desperately checked their systems, trying to work out what they could do to save the situation. Sirens were flashing, and they knew if they stayed out of atmosphere, they could soon die. Oxygen was venting out of the side, and their air supply was dwindling. Desperately putting it into manual control, Frank took the controls and headed towards the surface of the unknown planet near where they had come out. Atmosphere was a struggle. There were flames inside the ship, heat was generated, and as it went through the atmosphere, even more heat started to accumulate. The ship was juddering as it was buffeted. Heavy winds in the upper atmosphere threw it from left to right until suddenly they were through and they could see a red sea below them. They headed down, realizing that this sea was not actually water. With horror, they realised it was trees with red leaves as the ship ploughed, with bits being pulled off the sides, and they were thrown about inside the cockpit as the ship tumbled and bounced before coming to a stop. Everything went black. Both Frank and Debbie awoke in agony. Sirens blaring, adding to their headaches, smoke tickling their throats as some of the fires went on inside the ship. But they pulled themselves together, grabbing what they could, and headed out. Round the ship was fruit trees that had been shattered and burn marks as the heat had gone through. So they turned and headed off into the forest. There were paths heading through there, as far as they knew though. The planet wasn't populated, but all they could do was head in and hope. They walked, wondering what had created this path. It was a rough path. It wasn't laid or paved. So, could it have been creatures? They didn't know. They walked carefully and slowly through the trees. They heard a roar in the air and saw briefly, just through the trees, some gaps in the foliage, a large ship shaped like a wolf, pulled down more carefully some distance away. They turned and ran as fast as they could through the trees. They had to get some distance. They recognized that ship. It belonged to a strange cyborg, not the one they'd fought. This one was a tracker, a bounty hunter. He was part man, part wolf, like the werewolves of old, apart from most of his extra parts were mechanical. They slowed down and carefully started moving, wondering what they could do to actually cover their tracks. They saw further on what seemed to be a light stream, but not knowing the planet, they daren't go into the water, not knowing what could be in there and what the wolf would bring with him. Could the wolf track through water? Usually water was a block. They continued, pinned in by the water, and moved into the trees in the other direction, heading off the path, dodging through the foliage, trying to dodge bushes and bits and pieces as they moved. They heard in the background slight whirs, almost like insects. Turning with horror, they saw what looked like large flies and then realised they were drones. They were the wolves' way of tracking. They sped up and started running, panicking now. Though they'd won the big fight, they weren't equipped. Debbie was hobbling where she'd been shot, her hurt leg just barely holding off the pain. Blood had started dripping, leaving yet another source as they went. In the distance, another ship dropped, and they wondered what else this might bring for them. Suddenly, a clearing opened out, and they started to breathe, thinking perhaps they'd found some kind of way through. They stepped in, and to their horror, the wolf was there. Debbie was in no way able to fight at this point. Blood loss had already made her woozy, and she was struggling to stand. Frank looked at the wolf. He was huge, far bigger than him. Looking at him, he looked nervously and pulled his hammer out, ready to go. It was time. As they started fighting, the wolf charged at him. Frank parried and blocked, asking why, what was happening, what was the wolf's idea? Why was the wolf coming after them? The wolf, at his distance, smiled and said that he was tracking them as he'd been told they cheated in the arena. In the distance, loud trumping and crunching came along. Mike, looking at the werewolf, shook his head and said, look at Debbie. She's hurt. Do we look like people that were cheating? It was and just as he said it, the rogue cyborg stepped in several of his drones and smiled at the wolf. The wolf looked horrified and realized he'd been had. Smiling, the cyborg said, now I get all of you. There is a big bounty on your head. That will be quite nice and make up for the pay. And on you two, I get revenge. Frank looked over at Debbie. He knew he couldn't get her away. He looked at the wolf. I'll hold them off. Can you save her? The wolf looked cross, looked at the girl, looked at the robots. I can stop them, don't worry. Nodding, the big wolf scooped up the girl and disappeared into the woods. Frank turned, set himself up, and charged. His hammer had one more trick in it. The cyborg laughed, heavily armoured with his own weapon, and stepped up. You'll take no time. Large shield forward to take the hammer, but just as Frank got there, he triggered the shield, triggered the hammer. In the distance, Debbie and the wolf were running at speed through the forest. Debbie had to stifle a scream as she heard the explosion in the distance that could only mean one thing. Frank had given his life to save hers. Screaming, trying to go back, the wolf held her tight as he ran at speed through, heading for his ship to escape. As they headed in, they knew they weren't out of the woods yet. Getting in, strapping down, the wolf quickly got some bandages and a shot for Debbie to try and stabilize her wounds. And then, looking up, powered up, forcing his ship to take off at high gravity as weapons trailed from the cyborg ship and started firing. They launched, heading straight into the atmosphere, into space, holding tight as more ships came in, chasing them as they headed out, trying to get enough distance to enter hyperspace. Seeing that there was a large meteor cluster, they dropped in, trying to avoid, dodging around various meteors, up, down, the ships coming around them. The strain and the stresses could be heard in the metal as it groaned in the cyborg ship. The sensors showed an anomaly. If they could get to that, then perhaps they could use it to hide them. It was only as they came too close and suddenly felt the gravitational pull of the anomaly latch onto them that the wolf realized his mistake. A wormhole swirled in front of them, gradually sucking them in towards it. The ships from behind started coming in at speed, and suddenly Wolf knew he had only one option. He smacked the thrusters at full power and shot at speed into the unknown. The pain was excruciating as lights, noise, and unknown thoughts and feelings flooded through them. The ship groaned and strained, struggling to hold together as space and time pulled and constricted in uncontrolled ways, shooting them across the galaxy to somewhere completely unknown. How long it lasted, they had no idea, till suddenly they were flung out the other side to silence. Stopping to breathe, Wolf ran various medical checks, both on the ship himself, but noticed one thing when he looked to Debbie's. Debbie was with child. She was pregnant. Trying to decide, he realized he had to tell her. As she came round after the ordeal, as they floated in space, the wolf said that they were completely lost. He had no idea where they were. Hopefully they could find somewhere safe, and told Debbie of the child. Debbie looked out of the window over the strange new worlds they could see. The new worlds, the new places, a new life. The wolf had made a promise. He would be there to help her through it. Frank had given his life for her and unknowingly for their unborn child. So he would never truly be gone now, for with her child, she would always have part of him. She looked out the window and wondered what the galaxy was going to bring to them next. There you go. What did you think? Pictures, hopefully changes in music. I can't hear the music, so I don't really know on that front. But I hope it worked and I hope you enjoyed it. Well, in your case, Derek, the last 30 seconds. Well, 5 minutes. Thank you. I'll bump those up a bit for the next one. I can see the numbers, but I can't see how it comes out. Good. The plan will be to go in and probably try and do the same thing again. So if it's working, create the story on one day and then tell the story on the next one. And as I said, I'm not 100% certain it will be on Thursday. Thursday A is the day after Christmas, so a lot of people may well be busy. So what I might do is, if I don't make it back in time, make story creation the following Sunday and then tell the story on the Thursday or something like that. We can talk online. And then I can tell the story New Year's Day. We'll work something out. Maybe do a Sunday to Sunday and skip both Thursdays. But besides that, farewell for now, and I will see you all soon. Bye.